Widow lives forgotten in a cabin, until a farmer arrives one day. She lived alone in a small wooden cabin far away from the busy part of the village. The cabin stood near a quiet forest, where the wind spoke more than people ever did. The roof was old, the walls were cracked, and the door made a soft crying sound every time it opened. This cabin had once been a happy home, but now it carried only silence and memories. The widow woke up every morning before the sun rose. Not because she had somewhere to go, but because sleep no longer stayed with her for long. Her body was weak, and her heart was tired from years of waiting for something that never came. She would sit on the edge of her narrow bed, wrap her thin shawl around her shoulders, and listen to the sounds outside. Birds sang, trees moved, and life continued, but none of it seemed to notice her. Years ago, this cabin was filled with laughter. Her husband had built it with his own hands. He was a simple man, but kind and strong. They had dreamed of growing old together, watching seasons change from the same small window. But life had different plans. One winter, he fell ill and never recovered. When he was gone, everything changed. At first, neighbors came to offer words and food. They sat with her, spoke gently, and promised to return. But time passed. One by one, their visits became fewer. New families moved in, old faces disappeared, and the widow slowly faded from everyone's thoughts. She did not blame them. People are busy. Life moves fast, but the forgetting still hurt. She had no children to check on her. Her relatives lived far away and stopped writing long ago. As years passed, she learned to depend only on herself. She planted small vegetables near the cabin, collected firewood, and fixed what she could with trembling hands. When winter came, it was the hardest. Cold nights felt endless, and sometimes she cried quietly, not because of pain but because of the deep loneliness. The widow spoke very little these days. There was no one to talk to. Sometimes she spoke to her late husband's old chair, imagining he was still sitting there, listening. Other times she spoke to the walls, telling them about her day. The cabin had become her only witness. Her clothes were old but clean. She washed them in a small stream nearby, even when the water was freezing. Pride was one thing she had not lost. Even though she had almost nothing, she still tried to keep her dignity. She never begged. She never asked for help. In her heart, she believed no one would come anyway. Every object in the cabin held a memory. The table where they once shared meals. The shelf where his tools still rested, untouched. The window where she waited in the evenings, watching the path that led to the village, even though no footsteps had appeared in years. Hope had grown weak, but it never fully died. Some days were harder than others. On those days, her body ached and her hands shook too much to cook properly. She would eat dry bread and drink warm water, telling herself it was enough. She had learned to accept less food, less warmth, less love. The village nearby had changed. New houses, new faces, new stories. People passed near the forest road sometimes, but no one ever turned toward the old cabin. Many did not even know someone still lived there. To them, it was just an abandoned place, forgotten by time. At night, the widow sat by a small fire, its weak light dancing on the walls. Shadows reminded her of the past. She remembered festivals, laughter, and the sound of her husband's voice. Tears would roll down her face, but she wiped them quickly. Crying did not change anything. She had learned that too. Despite everything, she woke up each day. She swept the floor. She fed the small birds that came near her door. She whispered prayers, not asking for much, only strength to see another sunrise. Her life was quiet, unnoticed, and heavy, but it continued. One morning, as she stepped outside to gather wood, she felt more tired than usual. The air was cold and her legs felt weak. She sat on a stone near the cabin, catching her breath. For a moment, she wondered how long she could continue like this. The thought scared her, but she pushed it away. Thinking too much made the days harder. She went back inside and lit the fire. Smoke rose slowly from the chimney, blending into the sky. It was just another ordinary morning for her, silent, lonely, and slow. She had no idea that this small sign of life, this thin line of smoke, would soon catch someone's attention. For now, she remained unaware. She stirred her pot, warmed her hands, and prepared for another long day alone. She believed the world had already forgotten her. And she believed she would live out her remaining days in this quiet cabin, unseen and unheard. But life, even in its quietest moments, was preparing something she never expected. The morning sun rose slowly over the wide fields near the forest. A farmer named Daniel was already awake, walking across his land with steady steps. He was a middle-aged man with a calm face and hands shaped by years of honest work. His life was simple. He worked his fields, cared for his animals, and returned home each evening to a quiet house. He did not speak much, but he noticed small things that others often ignored. As Daniel checked his crops that morning, his eyes moved toward the forest line. Something unusual caught his attention. A thin line of smoke rose into the sky from a place where no one usually lived. He paused and looked again. The old cabin near the forest was supposed to be empty. Everyone believed it had been abandoned years ago. Yet the smoke was real, moving gently with the wind. Daniel felt a strange pull in his chest. He told himself it was probably nothing. Maybe someone passing by had lit a fire. Still, the thought stayed with him. Smoke meant someone was there. And where there were people, there could be need. After a moment of quiet thought, he decided to walk toward the cabin. The path was narrow and covered with fallen leaves. As he walked, memories came to him. He remembered seeing the cabin long ago when he was younger. He remembered a kind couple who once lived there, though he did not know them well. Time had erased many details, but the image of the place remained in his mind. When Daniel reached the cabin, he stopped a few steps away. The wood looked older than he remembered. The roof sagged slightly and the door looked weak. The place did not look like a home where someone should still be living. He hesitated, unsure if he should knock. He did not want to frighten anyone. Before he could decide, the door opened slowly. The widow stood there, holding the edge of the door for support. Her face showed surprise and fear at the same time. It had been so long since anyone stood before her door that she did not know how to react. Daniel quickly raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. He spoke in a soft voice and told her he was a farmer from nearby. He explained that he saw smoke and wanted to make sure everything was all right. His words were simple and calm. The widow studied him carefully. She was not used to visitors. Her heart beat fast, but something in his voice felt honest. After a long moment, she nodded and stepped back, allowing him to stand near the door. She did not invite him inside, but she did not send him away either. Daniel noticed many things without saying much. He saw how thin she was. He saw how the cold air passed easily through the cracks in the walls. He smelled the weak fire burning inside. These small details told him a story without words. They spoke slowly. The widow answered his questions with short replies. Yes, she lived there alone. Yes, she was fine. Yes, she managed. Each answer was true in her own way, but also incomplete. Daniel could hear the tiredness in her voice. He asked if she needed anything. The widow shook her head quickly. Asking for help was not something she knew how to do anymore. She thanked him for checking and said she did not want to trouble him. Her words were polite, but her eyes told a different story. Daniel nodded. He did not push. He understood that pride and fear can be strong walls. He told her he worked the nearby land and passed through the area often. He said if she ever needed anything, she could let him know. Before leaving, he offered to bring some extra vegetables from his farm the next day. He spoke as if it was nothing special. The widow hesitated. No one had offered her help in years. She wanted to refuse, but the thought of fresh food touched something deep inside her. After a long silence, she quietly agreed. Her voice was barely louder than the wind. As Daniel walked away, he felt a heavy feeling in his chest. He had seen loneliness before, but this felt deeper. He kept thinking about her small figure standing in the doorway. He wondered how long she had lived like this, unseen and forgotten. The widow closed the door and leaned against it, breathing slowly. Her hands were shaking. A stranger had come, spoken kindly, and offered help without asking for anything in return. She did not know how to feel. Part of her felt afraid. Another part felt something she had not felt in a long time, hope. The rest of her day passed differently. Her thoughts kept returning to the farmer's visit. She replayed his words in her mind, wondering if he truly meant them. She had learned not to expect much from people. Promises were easy to make and easy to forget. That night, she slept poorly. Memories of the past mixed with thoughts of the future. She remembered how neighbors once promised to return. She also remembered how each promise slowly disappeared. She told herself not to believe too much. The next morning, she woke early again. She cleaned the small space inside the cabin more carefully than usual. She fixed her shawl and brushed her hair with slow movements. She did not know why she was doing this. Maybe she wanted to feel human again, even if only for a moment. Time passed slowly. She sat near the window, watching the path. Hours felt long. Just as she began to think the farmer would not return, she heard footsteps. Her heart skipped a beat. Daniel appeared carrying a small basket. He walked calmly, as if this visit was a normal part of his day. He greeted her gently and placed the basket near the door. Inside were fresh vegetables, bread, and a small jar of honey. The widow's eyes filled with tears, though she tried to hide them. She thanked him again and again. Her voice broke, but she did not turn away this time. Daniel noticed her emotion but did not make it uncomfortable. He simply smiled and said he had more than enough. They talked a little longer this time. Daniel asked about the cabin, about the land, about her health. He listened more than he spoke. The widow found herself sharing small details of her life without planning to. It felt strange, but also relieving. When Daniel left again, the cabin felt different. It was still quiet, but the silence was not as heavy. The widow sat at the table and looked at the food. She realized she was smiling without meaning to. For the first time in many years, she felt that someone remembered her. And though she did not know it yet, this simple visit was only the beginning of a change that would slowly touch both their lives. Days passed and the farmer kept his promise. He returned again, then again after that. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes he brought simple tools, and sometimes he came only to check if the widow was doing well. He never came in a hurry, and he never acted like her situation was a burden. His visits were calm, steady, and respectful. At first, the widow felt uneasy each time she heard his footsteps. She worried that she was becoming dependent. She had survived alone for so long that accepting help felt strange and almost wrong. But the farmer never made her feel small. He spoke to her like an equal, like a person whose life mattered. One afternoon, he noticed the door did not close properly. Without asking too many questions, he fixed the loose hinge with a quiet focus. The sound of the hammer echoed softly in the forest. The widow watched from inside, her hands folded tightly. No one had repaired anything for her in years. She felt both grateful and overwhelmed. Another day, he repaired a broken chair. Another day, he cleared fallen branches from the roof. Each small act slowly changed the cabin. It became safer, warmer, and more stable. But more importantly, it changed how the widow felt inside. She began to prepare tea when she knew he was coming. It was a small thing, but it gave her a reason to look forward to the day. She even baked bread once, though her hands shook as she worked. When she offered it to him, her face showed both pride and fear. The farmer accepted it with a smile as if it were a great gift. They talked more now. At first, the conversations were simple: weather, crops, the forest, the birds. Slowly, deeper stories began to appear. The widow spoke of her husband, of the cabin being built piece by piece, of dreams that never came true. Her voice sometimes broke, but she did not stop speaking. The farmer listened carefully. He never rushed her words. He never tried to fix her sadness with advice. His silence was gentle, and it allowed her to speak freely. For the first time in years, her memories were heard. One evening, she shared how she felt forgotten. She admitted that some days she wondered if anyone would notice if she disappeared. The words were heavy, but she spoke them honestly. The farmer looked at her with quiet seriousness and told her she mattered. He said it simply, without big speeches, but the words stayed with her long after he left. As weeks passed, the widow's health slowly improved. Regular meals gave her strength. Warmth in the cabin helped her rest better at night. She began to walk outside more, tending to her small garden with renewed care. The plants responded, growing greener than before. The forest no longer felt like a wall separating her from the world. It felt like a place that connected her to it. Birds came closer. Sunlight felt warmer. Even the wind seemed kinder. The farmer never stayed too long. He respected her space. Yet his presence left a mark that stayed. When he was not there, she found herself thinking about their conversations, replaying his calm voice in her mind. One day, the widow surprised herself by laughing. It happened suddenly, during a story the farmer told about a stubborn animal on his farm. The sound of her laughter felt strange in her ears. She quickly covered her mouth, embarrassed. The farmer laughed too, and for a moment the years of loneliness faded. She began to notice changes in herself. She stood a little straighter. She looked at her reflection in a small cracked mirror and fixed her hair. These small acts reminded her that she was still alive, still part of the world. The farmer also changed. He found himself thinking about the widow during his work. He worried when storms came, wondering if the cabin would hold. He felt a responsibility that went beyond kindness. He did not fully understand it, but he accepted it. One afternoon, he brought extra seeds and showed her how to plant them properly. They worked side by side in the small garden. The soil was dark and rich, and their hands moved slowly, carefully. It felt peaceful. It felt right. The widow shared stories of village life from long ago. She remembered festivals, music, and gatherings that no longer existed. The farmer listened with interest, learning about a past he had never known. As trust grew, the widow allowed herself to hope, though quietly. She did not expect miracles. She did not expect her life to become easy, but she began to believe that she did not have to face everything alone anymore. There were still hard days. Pain did not disappear overnight. Some mornings she woke with sadness heavy in her chest. But now she knew someone would come, someone would notice. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, the farmer stood at the door, ready to leave. The widow thanked him again, but this time her thanks sounded different. It was not just polite. It was full of feeling. After he left, she sat alone by the fire. The cabin was quiet, but the silence was no longer empty. It was peaceful. She looked around the room and realized that while the walls were still old and the floor still worn, the cabin had become a home again. Not because of repairs alone, but because of connection. For the first time in many years, the widow did not feel invisible. And she knew, deep inside, that these small acts of kindness were slowly building something strong, something that neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. As the seasons changed, the air around the cabin felt different. The cold days slowly softened, and gentle warmth returned to the forest. The widow noticed the change not only outside, but inside herself as well. Her mornings no longer began with only silence and pain. There was now a rhythm to her days, shaped by small moments of care and connection. The farmer continued his visits, but something new began to happen. Other people started to notice. When he spoke in the village about extra vegetables or firewood, he mentioned the old cabin near the forest. At first, people were surprised. Many did not even know someone still lived there. Some felt uneasy, others curious. One afternoon, a woman from the village walked with the farmer to the cabin. She carried warm clothes and bread. She looked nervous, unsure of how she would be received. The widow opened the door slowly and saw a face she had not seen in many years. It was someone who once lived nearby, someone who had moved on without looking back. The moment was quiet and emotional. Words came slowly, filled with regret and care. The woman apologized for not visiting sooner. The widow listened without anger. Time had softened her heart. She accepted the gifts and the words, even though they arrived late. After that day, the path to the cabin was no longer empty, not crowded but no longer forgotten. Another neighbor came one week, bringing soup. Another came later, offering help with cleaning. Each visit reminded the widow that the world had not completely closed its doors on her. At first, she felt unsure. Too much attention after years of being unseen felt overwhelming. She worried that it would all disappear again. But the farmer encouraged her gently, reminding her that people sometimes need a reason to remember. With help, the cabin changed even more. The roof was strengthened. Gaps in the walls were closed. A stronger door replaced the old one. The widow watched these changes with mixed feelings. The cabin was part of her past, but she understood that change did not erase memories, it protected them. Her strength continued to return. She could walk farther without feeling weak. She spent more time outside, sitting in the sunlight or tending her garden. Her face showed more color and her eyes looked brighter. She smiled more often, sometimes without noticing. The widow also began to visit the village, slowly and carefully. At first she stayed only a short time, sitting quietly at the edge of gatherings. People greeted her kindly. Some spoke to her with shame in their voices, others with warmth. She accepted it all with calm grace. The farmer never pushed her too far. He walked beside her, not in front. He understood that healing could not be rushed. When she needed rest, he respected it. When she wanted company, he was there. One day, the widow spoke about her fears. She admitted she was afraid of losing this new connection. She feared waking up one morning and finding herself alone again. The farmer listened and told her that care does not disappear just because time passes. It grows stronger when shared. Their bond became deeper, built on trust rather than need. They shared meals together now, sometimes in the cabin, sometimes outdoors. These moments were simple but meaningful. They did not talk much during meals, but the silence felt safe. The widow also began to help others in small ways. She shared vegetables from her garden. She offered kind words to those who were tired or sad. Having been lonely herself, she understood pain without needing explanations. The village slowly changed too. People became more aware of those living quietly on the edges. The widow's story reminded them that silence does not mean absence, and age does not mean the end of worth. One evening, after a long day, the widow sat by her window and watched the sky change colors. She thought about her husband, about the long years of loneliness, and about the unexpected turn her life had taken. She felt sadness, but also peace. She realized that kindness had not erased her past, but it had given her a future where she was not invisible, a future where her presence mattered. As the sun set, she whispered a quiet thank you, not only to the farmer, but to life itself. She understood now that even after long silence, a single caring step could open the door to healing. And though she did not know what tomorrow would bring, she felt ready to face it, knowing she was no longer alone. Time moved forward gently, like a calm river that no longer rushed past her life. The widow woke each morning with a sense of purpose she had not felt in many years. The cabin was still simple, but it felt alive again. Light entered through the windows, warmth stayed inside the walls, and quiet no longer felt heavy. She had grown stronger, not only in her body but in her heart. Her steps were steadier. Her breath came easier. She could work in her garden without resting every few minutes. The soil under her hands reminded her that life continued to grow when given care. The farmer remained a steady presence. He did not change who he was, and that made everything feel safe. He continued his work on the land, but he always found time to stop by the cabin. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they worked in silence. Both felt right. One morning, the widow surprised him by inviting him inside for a full meal. It was the first time she had planned something like that in years. She cooked slowly, carefully, putting her heart into the food. When they sat at the table together, she felt proud. It was not a grand meal, but it was made with effort and gratitude. They talked about ordinary things, the weather, the crops, the changing seasons. But underneath those simple words was a deeper understanding. They had both walked lonely paths. They both knew what it meant to carry quiet pain. The widow began to share more of herself with the village. She attended small gatherings and greeted people with a gentle smile. Children listened when she told stories of the past. Young adults asked her advice. Slowly, she became part of the village again, not as someone to be pitied, but as someone respected. Her cabin became a place of comfort for others too. People stopped by for conversation or rest. They brought news, laughter, and warmth. The widow listened, offered kind words, and shared what she could. She felt useful again, and that feeling filled her with calm joy. The farmer watched all this with quiet happiness. He never took credit for the changes. He believed that kindness should not ask for recognition. Still, he felt grateful that his simple choice to follow a line of smoke had led to something meaningful. One evening, as the sky turned soft and golden, the widow and the farmer sat outside the cabin. The forest was calm. Birds rested. The world felt still. The widow spoke softly, saying she once believed her life was already finished. She said she had been waiting for the end, not the future. The farmer listened, then spoke gently. He told her that lives do not lose value with time. He said that every day a person wakes up is a chance for something new. His words were simple, but they carried truth. The widow nodded. She understood now. She had learned that life could surprise even when hope felt far away. As months passed, the widow's laughter became more common. Her eyes shone brighter. She still missed her husband, still remembered the years of loneliness, but those memories no longer controlled her. They were part of her story, not the end of it. The village also carried her story forward. People spoke about how close they came to forgetting someone important. They learned to look around more carefully, to notice quiet places and silent lives. One day, a child asked the widow why she always smiled now. She paused, then answered honestly. She said she smiled because someone once noticed her when no one else did, and because that moment changed everything. As the years continued, the widow aged, but she did not fade away. She remained surrounded by care, conversation, and warmth. Her cabin stood strong, filled with light and voices. It was no longer a forgotten place. The farmer continued his work, content in knowing that his kindness had grown into something lasting. He never thought of himself as special. He simply believed in doing what felt right. And so the widow lived her remaining years with dignity and peace. Not alone, not unseen. Her life became a quiet reminder that even the smallest act of care can restore hope, and that no one is truly forgotten when someone chooses to notice. In the end, her story was not about loss but about return. A return to life, a return to connection, a return to being remembered.